Hi, and welcome to this session with Neel Murty from Google. Welcome, Neel.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason.
Brilliant. We'll be talking about measurement, and in particular, the idea that I've been having of moving from micro to macro. And a lot of my thought about measurement came from a conversation we had together in Singapore. I was giving the Google Marketing Live talks, and you and I sat down for lunch. Thank you for the lunch. And you asked me lots of questions that I didn't know the answer to. And I loved that. So when I started talking about the funnel query pathway, which was kind of a half-developed idea at the time, and I was saying, let's identify the ideal question at the bottom of the funnel, then the ones that lead to that, and then the ones that lead to the middle of the funnel. And you said, and I paraphrase, you're just making that up, Jason. And I really like that because he said, okay, where do you get these questions from? Where do you get the ICP? Where do you get that cohort intent, profit margin combination that I'm now talking about? So give me your perspective on that, rather than just saying, what do I think my ICP is? And what do I think my ICP would ask at the bottom of the funnel? How would you go about it?
Fantastic. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Jason. And you've been very kind with the framing of it, because the way I see it, you come in with so much meat to that conversation that I was just trying to learn more about how you've been unpacking this whole change that we've seen in the ecosystem. Now,
right, I think what was happening is I was thinking very quickly as we discussed, but I kept thinking, oh wow, that's an interesting idea. So let's just say it was a conversation where we both mutually got a lot of it, because you're looking at it from what I can see from a more marketing perspective of doing the more traditional offline marketing user group questionnaire thingy.
Sort of, right? And this is spot on, because look, I've spent the last 14 years at Google helping marketers answer one deceptively simple question, which is our marketing actually working? Right? And my world has usually been that of measurement, attribution, incrementality, marketing mix modeling. And so at the end of the day, what I care most about is helping marketers link all of their energies, all of their investments back to how did this move the business objective for me? And so when I wear that lens, I see that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Things have to connect in some shape or form. It has to be one cohesive system. So I was really coming into it with the perspective of, this is new. There's a lot of exciting things that are going on with the way LLMs are behaving and search is behaving. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a business outcome that marketers want to drive from it. So it needs to fit into that bigger picture in some shape or form. Right? So that's where I was sort of leading from. And so when I wear that lens and I think about the question you ask, I think the uncomfortable truth is this, right? If you put 8 really smart marketers into a room, you give them coffee, you sort of ask them a question of, who's your ideal customer? What's very likely to happen is they'll come back with 8 different profiles, and it's most likely going to be a flattering self-portrait of some sort, right? Where it's a bit of a horoscope. It's vague enough that everyone nods, and specific enough to feel like insight, right? But it's hard to really pin down. And I find that the fix is often embarrassingly mundane, which is you start with data you have. So you start with what you already have. Your customers have already told you in most cases. They've told your sales teams in 40 different discovery calls they've had. They're sitting in your tickets, right, in your support queue someplace. They've typed it into the chat widget that most likely is not being monitored after 6 p.m. If you have Google Analytics, then it's probably sitting in your BQ someplace in BigQuery, where you can see which pages that customers actually spend a lot of time on. You can see what did they type into your search widget. If you have third-party sources, then you might even see it in social sentiment trackers on what are customers saying about you online. You might get it in brand health tracking and in understanding what's really been moving with your panel results over time. Right? So there's a host of data points that businesses are already sitting on. And so I think when you want to start building this, you'd start by excavation to start at the very beginning. Right? So excavate, not invent. And you'd go back to some of this conversational data. You'd go back to sales transcripts, support pages, and cluster it into the jobs to be done. Because your customers have already been telling you.
Right.
Now,
And when you mentioned brand health tracker, what exactly do you mean? Because coming from the SEO world, that isn't something I've come across very often.
Yeah. So a brand health tracker is essentially a mechanism, usually a panel-based mechanism, where businesses would try and build a running track on, do customers know about their brand? What percentage of their customers know about their brand? And if they're really savvy, then they would probably be tracking it at a use case, customer need level, to say, what do my customers think about my brand for? So,
Right.
for example, a bank could be relevant in terms of, does everyone know the brand name of the bank? But you might also want to think about who comes to mind when the customer feels the need for a credit card. Who comes to mind when the customer thinks about how they manage personal loans, or which brand comes to mind when they need to make transfers to a friend, right? Does the brand automatically come up across all of those different needs, or do customers actually go to a fintech app when they need to meet some of these needs? And so,
Right.
yeah, a
And
brand
sorry,
health
we could
tracking-
actually make an equivalence there, because for me, that's also top of algorithmic mind. So does the algorithm think of my brand when talking about?
Spot on, right? That's exactly it, right? We've done this for humans, but you can see that with the algorithm very likely to influence so many choices going ahead, you'd want to link it back to how top of mind are you for the algorithm, and then connect the two, as opposed to having these two be separate efforts that you run.
Right, brilliant. So the other thing we talked about was presence, prominence, and sentiment. And that's how we're measuring it at Kalicube. And the exact way that I'm now doing it came out of the conversation that I was having with you. We had a methodology and a system. I think that's important to say. We have a methodology. We're not saying it's absolutely perfect. What we are saying is it makes sense. I can defend it with gusto and enthusiasm. I believe in it 100%. If you believe in my methodology, get on board, and we can, not you personally, obviously my clients or people around us. And then once you have it, you compare like with like over time. And then you have a macro measurement that you can make good business decisions on. So tell me about presence, prominence, and sentiment. I love that concept.
Yes, spot on, right? I think I tend to default to existing frameworks and mechanisms that have been proven in marketing science. And one of these frameworks is one that Ehrenberg-Bass talks about, again, more from the brand perspective. But one of the frames Ehrenberg-Bass uses is physical and mental availability. And I see that the physical availability frame really breaks down into presence, prominence, and relevance. Right? Those are the three that get used in the offline world.
Yeah.
Except in this case, when you look at it, relevance is a given, right? So almost think of it like a supermarket shelf, right? In a supermarket shelf, presence is being stocked on the shelf to begin with, right? If you're not on the shelf, you're not going to be selected. Prominence is, where are you on the shelf? Are you at the top of the shelf, or are you at the bottom shelf where, dignity probably goes to die? So you want to be on the top of the shelf as much as possible. Presence, prominence, and relevance is, do you have the feature that the user is looking for? Are you in the right size? Do you come with the right attributes? So if they care about a child-sized version or a environment-friendly version, or they're looking for certain ingredients, does your product have those ingredients?
Yeah.
That's what gets used in the offline world today. Now, if I sort of repurpose that to an online world, presence and prominence seem like a given. You need to be present. So if the user is looking for the product in a particular category, looking for a particular geography, right, for you to be present is a given. Prominence sort of speaks to how early on are you showing up? Are you the first recommendation that the LLM is making, or are you the fifth one in the list? So you're a bit of an afterthought for the algorithm.
Yeah.
Relevance, however, is almost a precondition, because if you're not relevant, then the algorithm doesn't even let you in. The tweak being, in this case, because the algorithm is referring to multiple other sources to offer a point of view on, hey, here's what others are saying about the product, we get to replace it with sentiment. Because once you're in the answer, the question that actually begins to move the money is when the engine names you, does it name you in a warm, neutral, or is it quietly throwing you under the bus when it's sort of calling out your brand, right? And that's really where sentiment starts to play a role in distinguishing from the rest.
Right.
So I'd
yeah,
say,
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No. So it's basically this, right? So I'd say presence without prominence, right? You're present, but you're not prominent. You're the fifth one on the list. You become a bit of a footnote. Prominence with bad sentiment is probably worse than absence. So you'd probably be better off than show up with a bad sentiment. And so the art is really knowing where you're shot.
Yeah, which is a great point. And so kind of the idea of relevancy, it's the engine itself that's taking care of that, i.e. if the engine is doing its job correctly, which increasingly it is, it will be presenting you as a relevant solution in the right circumstances. Therefore, relevancy is something that we, as you said, a precondition. And so the sentiment becomes incredibly important. And that's something that I focus on a lot at Kalicube is what does the algorithm, what do the engines say about your brand at the bottom of the funnel, which is where we start at Kalicube. If that's positive and it's incredibly detailed and every detail makes you look like a superstar, as you go up the funnel, that's going to carry up. And that's the secret to Kalicube and what we're doing. But if we move forward, that actually comes down to brand health tracking, is what does the algorithm think of you? Yes. But then you talk about category entry points as the unit of analysis. So yes. How does that translate to what we're talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is part of what I think connects across a few different things. I'll also add a disclaimer towards the end, though. So I think the headlines is, as such, we've trained the industry to worship a keyword, which is the keyword is the central unit of everything. Right? Yep. And it's the literal string a person typed. Now, this is helpful when a search box was the entire world, but we're clearly seeing that evolve, where a keyword tells you what was typed, but it doesn't tell you why anyone bothered to type that keyword. And the category entry point does exactly that. Right? It's the user need that eventually leads to specific keywords and strings being typed. And brand health trackers have historically tried to link awareness of the brand to user needs.
Right.
So if you think about a category entry point as a moment in someone's life that sent them looking, if it's a skincare brand, right? My skin keeps breaking out and is oily in humidity, is a kind of a user need that would lead someone down a chain of different user searches that would eventually lead them to a user search on, what I need, a particular kind of ointment or a particular kind of cream that deals with this kind of stuff. But the user need is that humidity is causing some kind of skin condition for the user. Right? And so being able to link back to those entry points is something brand health trackers have done, and arguably would be a thing that algorithms would want to be aware of so that they're able to recommend brands at the right point.
Right. And so there's a whole question of why the user is here, less than what they're saying. So the idea of saying, I'm just looking to optimize for skin lotion. It's the specific circumstances the user is in at the moment they come, let's say, in market. And I need to address that as a brand. And the other problem, of course, is we've been measuring the funnel in SEO traditionally by the number of visitors we get for each stage of the funnel. And with the funnel now in the engine, and the engine being to a great extent opaque, we have that problem is we can no longer see the funnel, and we're, I think, very scared.
That is correct. I think a part of this also goes back to how, because of how much stochastic all of the results are, it's not really one figure anymore. It's going to be about measuring not just the coverage of citation rates, but also knowing how much do these citation rates vary. What's the standard deviation on these? And almost starting to represent them as a statistical value, as opposed to thinking of them in absolute terms as, my score is 1,000 and that's the number that I'm going to try and beat. We need to be that much more sensitive to how much variance are we seeing across the kind of entry points, the kind of answers that we want to open.
Right, and that was kind of where the series I wrote on Search Engine Land started, with Rand Fishkin doing a study about the fact that the consistency simply isn't there. And my disagreement was, it is there when the internet is organized, or the little corner of the internet is organized. And once again, that's what we do at Kalicube. And then I talked to Laurence O'Toole from Authoritas, and what you're describing is exactly how they measure it. That consistency over the different engines, consistency over time within a market. And I think he said 7% is the number of brands that are within an industry that are very consistently cited.
Got it.
I'm not going to ask you to comment on the number. Pardon me, excuse me.
Sorry. It just means that it's a quality metric then, in terms of how well you're doing if you're consistently being cited.
Yeah. Right. I mean, Laurence is saying, and I agree with him, you got to aim for that 7%, whether it's 7%. I mean, it's not across every market. It's going to be 10 in some markets. It's going to be 50 in other markets. But you need to be aiming for whatever that percentage is of the consistently cited brands, because that's when all of the engines have understood you, understood where you're relevant, and are most likely to recommend you. Now, to move on to the bots, we're talking about channel reports and bot reports. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we've not been tracking bots suddenly seems quite foolish.
Yes, 100% right. I think for years, I think the industry has operated on the assumption that human traffic is the signal and bot traffic is the noise, right? And so if anything, folks spend time trying to keep bots out for arguably for good reasons. I mean, all of our analytics was designed to scrub out machine hits as much as possible, because what we cared about was the human hit, right? All of the channel reports were entirely built around this purity of human-centric session data. And channel reports were sort of, you'd want to keep out any bot out of it. But I think especially with the rise of the autonomous agents and AI agents, that bots are no longer just mindless scrapers. And in some cases, they are your customers, right? So you want to be able to track for them arriving, the research options they're able to see, whether they can compare prices. All of that is something you'd want to capture. And therefore, you'd want to know, where did the agent struggle when it was trying to parse your website, right? Was it on pricing? Was it in terms of the data it had access to? When verified agents visited, what specific tasks did they come to execute? Especially once you start moving more towards the automated and agentic side of things. Which kind of purchasing actions were initiated, verified, right? Or which ones were completed entirely by an agent without a human actually clicking a button?
Brilliant. And I mean, that whole thing of delegation is the key to this, is that we never really thought about it. But when we were using search engines, we were delegating the research to the engine and saying to it, give me the 10 best links. And then with assistive engines, we're delegating the research and the assessment of that research to give the recommendations. And with agents, we're delegating the entire show and saying, go and make the purchase for me, which gives us what I would call the delegation boundary. And the question we need to ask as a business is, where do I sit on the agentic spectrum in terms of how much is my typical client going to delegate? Is it going to be mostly search? Is it going to be mostly assistive with quite a lot of delegation, or complete delegation with the agent?
Spot on.
Brilliant. Wonderful. And then we're going to come at the end to the displayed point, i.e., if we look at my Kalicube framework, the display, and I think this is really important, is that we look at that funnel inside the engine. So whether you're in AI mode or in ChatGPT or another assistive engine, or a search engine indeed, the mode of display is where the user sits and is coming down the funnel. And when I look at this with the 15 gates, it's a relatively small part. It's only one of the gates. So, but it's actually the most important in many senses, because it's the one that leads through to the one state, which is the imperfect click, the perfect click, or the agentic click. So what changes here as we move from search engines to assistive engines to agents in terms of measurement of that funnel, which is key to any marketing strategy and decisions?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how you framed this. And I feel like we've touched upon it in the session, but if I was to replay how I'm seeing it, it feels like measurement gets easy, then it gets hard, and then it gets easy again. That's sort of how I see it. Right. So think of it in terms of clicks, right? So the first would be clicks, and to a certain degree, the coverage and answers you care about. This is the part that I think is relatively easy, right? Because clicks is something we've done for 25 years. We know how to measure for it. A click hands you a clear session, a path, a whole attribution trail. And so that particular piece, I think we can nail really well. I expect folks will do it quickly and early on. The part that's somewhat harder in that context is once you get into the assistive recommendations, the middle part is really the value, right? Because the recommendation happens inside the model. There is no clear handoff to analytics. So being able to track for it is harder. And you might know that you were displayed a certain number of times, but all of the portion that you referenced earlier on, needing to know how much the variance in the answer is and getting things right will be crucial. And so that's really where the presence, prominence, and sentiment piece plays out when it comes to the assistive recommendations. And then when we get to the autonomous agent transactions, I think that part looks like it should be the hardest, but actually it might be the cleanest, because all of the rails are instrumented. And as long as you get the protocol right and all of it works as expected, when an agent transaction transacts under something like the agent payment protocol, it's all signed, it's auditable, it's non-repeatable event trails that you should be able to get, right? So in a sense, I think instrumented, just clicks, is very clear. The assistive recommendation is where you probably need to do a lot of work over the immediate to midterm. And as you go into the mid to long term, where agents are doing more of the transactions, it should be quite visible. And so the middle part is where a lot of exciting work might take place.
Right, and it's where we are right now, and it's the part that we're looking at a great deal. But then the last question then is, I can measure to a very good extent with search. I struggle to measure with assistive, and it's super easy to measure with agential. In fact, probably I've got too much data. So it's a bizarre kind of differentiation from mid to hard to easy in terms of tracking. Then we end up, the question is, I can track micro on search and assistive and agential, but I can only do macro in the middle.
Yes.
Can I mix the two? I'm arguing you can't. You have to have one strategy and one measurement system for all of it. But is there a way we could actually mix micro and macro in terms of reporting and measurement?
I feel like it's going to be a mix of the two, right? You are going to look at the micro because that data is available. So of course you look at how much click traffic you're getting from your LLMs on a week-on-week, month-on-month basis and use that to track progress. The interesting question to build on top of it, and I think businesses that will do well will get this part that's somewhat more gray, which is, what are the answers you really want to own?
Yeah.
And how well are you able to track your ownership of it? How well are you able to influence your ownership of those answers? Which is really that whole space on presence, prominence, and sentiment, where a lot of work will need to be done. And just the fact that it's not about getting just a few buttons right. There's a whole lot of work that needs to happen for that to come true, is why I think businesses that will succeed will be ones that get that piece right.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that if you can measure the ownership of the questions and the fact that you're top of algorithmic now for the questions from top to bottom of the funnel in the assistive world where you haven't got very much visibility, and you figure that out as a methodology, by definition, you're going to be okay in search and you're going to be okay in agential, as long as you've got the technical implementation that the agents can talk to your interface. At which point, I would argue, use the same methodology for all three in terms of actually measurement for your strategy and how you're going to build your strategy, and use the details that you can measure micro to decide the exact things that you need to do, i.e. the micro tactics, techniques, but the overall strategy needs one single measurement system, or you're going to distort what you're doing.
I agree. I agree, because at the end of the day, it's about owning the answers, and everything else should be in service of owning those answers.
Brilliant. That's the perfect ending, Neel. That's going to be quotable. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks so much for inviting me, Jason. It's been a fantastic conversation as always.
Thank you very much.